I never knew exactly what my heartbeat sounded like until it was the only thing I could hear. Standing frozen in the hallway, hand still on the door handle, I felt it pounding in my ears like a hammer against glass. Once she delivers, we'll let her go. My boss's voice, unmistakable through the crack in the conference room door. Then a deeper voice, our CEO, Richard, chuckling like he'd just heard a good joke instead of plans to destroy someone's life. After she saves us that $12.4 million contract. My work, my 18-hour days for the past 6 months. My name is Allison Reeves, and I'm 34 years old. Before I go further, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I honestly read every comment and would love to connect with you. Because what I'm about to share isn't just a story. It's the moment my entire understanding of loyalty and professional worth collapsed, and what I chose to do about it. I'd been with Pinnacle Solutions for 7 years. Not some fancy tech startup with ping-pong tables and cold brew on tap. Just a mid-sized consulting firm where I'd climbed from junior analyst to head project manager through nothing but relentless work and sacrifice. The Miller Project was supposed to be my crowning achievement, saving a $12.4 million contract that 3 senior managers had already failed to deliver on. The night I overheard them, I'd come back after dinner because I couldn't sleep anyway. My apartment had felt too quiet lately. 3 months before, my fiancé Michael had finally had enough of my dedication to the job and moved out, taking even the potted plants I'd never had time to water. "You're married to that company, Allison," he'd said, standing in the doorway with his last box. "I hope they love you back." They didn't. I should have slammed that conference room door open right then. Should have confronted them. Instead, I silently backed away, returned to my desk, and stared at my laptop screen until the words blurred. Then, with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, I kept working. That's what good girls do, right? What professional women do. We swallow the betrayal, process the hurt on our own time. 7 years of being the reliable one, the Allison will handle it woman, and this was my reward. I drove home at 1 a.m. with tears streaming down my face, mascara probably making me look like some tragic raccoon. But by morning, something had shifted inside me. The hurt had hardened into something else. Something with edges. The Miller Project wasn't just any contract. It represented exclusive rights to develop software for 3 of the largest hospitals in our region. The previous project managers, all men with MBA degrees from schools they never failed to mention, had bungled the requirements gathering, promised impossible features, and created a mess of code that barely functioned. The client, Westridge Health Group, was ready to walk. That's when my boss, Nathan Cooper, had called me into his office with that fake concerned look on his face. "Allison, you're the only one who can salvage this," he'd said, both hands pressed against his desk like he was physically transferring the burden. "Your attention to detail, your relationship skills. We need you." And God help me, I'd felt proud, special, chosen. What I didn't know then was that I wasn't chosen for my skills. I was chosen because I was expendable. The next morning after the overheard conversation, I arrived at work earlier than usual. My eyes were swollen despite the cucumber slices and cold spoons I'd pressed against them at 5 a.m. I wore my sharpest blazer, the navy one with structured shoulders that always made me feel like I was wearing armor. Nathan was already there, which was unusual. He smiled when he saw me, and I watched that smile with new eyes. How had I never noticed how it never quite reached his eyes? "Allison, just the woman I wanted to see. How's progress on Miller looking?" My throat felt tight, like I might either scream or throw up. Instead, I smiled back. "On track. The development team has corrected the integration issues from yesterday. I'm meeting with the client tomorrow for the interim review." "That's my girl," he said, patting my shoulder as he walked past. My girl, like I was a golden retriever who'd fetched the newspaper. I went through that day in a fog, nodding in meetings, answering emails, all while a voice in my head kept repeating the same phrase. Let her handle it, then fire her. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the sparse furniture Michael had left behind, and really looked at my life for the first time in years. The promotion I'd been angling for, the corner office, the retirement plan I was building, all of it based on the belief that hard work would be rewarded, that loyalty mattered. What a joke. I opened my laptop and started looking at my options. I could quit immediately satisfying, but financially devastating. I could half-ass the project and watch it fail, but that would hurt my professional reputation more than theirs. Or I could do what I always did: excel, deliver, and then be discarded. Unless. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. There was a fourth option. I could deliver exactly what they asked for and make sure I was the only one who understood exactly how I'd done it. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my professional life. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. I stopped by the office gym just enough to maintain appearances, but every spare minute was dedicated to 2 parallel tracks: saving the Miller project and documenting everything. Nathan checked in daily, his friendly concern growing as the deadline approached. "You're working too hard, Allison," he'd say, leaning against my cubicle wall. "We appreciate the dedication, but take care of yourself." The fake concern made my skin crawl, but I'd smile and nod. "Almost there, just want to make sure it's perfect." "That's why we need you on this," he'd say. And each time, I recorded the conversation on my phone, which sat face down on my desk. I also started talking more with Sarah from legal, who'd always been friendly but distant, the kind of work acquaintance you exchange pleasantries with but never really know. Over lunch one day, I carefully steered our conversation toward employment contracts and terminations. "It's funny," she said, picking at her salad, "how many managers don't understand the concept of constructive dismissal or how detailed our documentation needs to be for clean terminations." "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She leaned forward. "Between us, HR is always cleaning up after executives who think they can just fire people on a whim. There are protocols, especially for employees with your tenure." That night, I reviewed my employment contract with new eyes: the intellectual property clauses, the non-compete agreement, the termination procedures. I started making notes. The Miller project itself was coming together beautifully. I'd redesigned the workflow, simplified the interface, and created detailed documentation for every component. But I built it all around my own system, one that looked straightforward but had nuances only I fully understood. 10 days after overhearing my planned firing, I was presenting progress to Richard, our CEO, and Nathan. Richard rarely attended these meetings, but with $12.4 million on the line, he'd suddenly developed an interest in the details. "The client is thrilled with the new direction," I explained, clicking through slides that showed dramatic improvements in system performance. "We've corrected the fundamental flaws in the original architecture." "Excellent work, Allison," Richard said, not really looking at me but at the numbers on the screen. "I knew you were the right person for this job. The right person to use and discard." I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. "The next phase is critical," I continued. "We need to finalize the security protocols and complete user acceptance testing. I've prepared a detailed timeline." I handed them each a folder with printouts deliberately overwhelming, filled with technical specifications and project planning documents. Buried in the middle was page 17, a critical document outlining my unique implementation methodology. Neither of them would read it carefully. They never did. That night, I backed up everything to my personal cloud storage. Every email, every specification document, every piece of code I'd written or revised. Not to steal, I'm not a thief, but to protect myself with evidence of exactly what I'd contributed. 4 days before the final deadline, the Westridge Health Group executives requested an in-person meeting to review the final product before sign-off. This was standard procedure, but Nathan seemed unusually nervous. "It has to be perfect, Allison," he said, pacing my cubicle. "Richard will be there. The entire board will be watching this." "I understand," I said calmly. "Everything is on track." He hesitated. "I've added Jason to the presentation team just as backup." Jason, a junior developer who had contributed nothing to the project's recovery. I knew immediately what this meant. My replacement was already being positioned. "Great," I said, my voice steady while my stomach twisted. "He can handle the technical questions during the demonstration." That night, I made my final preparations. I reviewed the board meeting agenda Sarah had casually left visible on her desk when I'd stopped by with a coffee question. I confirmed the timing, the attendees, the meeting room setup. I finalized my presentation materials, sent the required copies to the executive assistant, and then did something I'd never done before in my professional life. I left work at 5 p.m. The guard at the front desk actually did a double take. "Early day, Ms. Reeves?" I smiled. "Big day tomorrow. Need to be fresh." At home, I laid out my outfit for the board meeting. Not my usual conservative suit, but a red dress I'd bought for a wedding and never worn. Bold, confident, memorable. Then I rehearsed what I would say, how I would stand, the exact timing of each reveal. Sleep came easily for the first time in weeks. I'd done everything possible to prepare. The rest would happen in that boardroom. The morning of the presentation dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the office early, but not as early as usual. Nathan was already texting me. "Where are you? We need to prep." I took my time responding, applying my lipstick carefully in my car's mirror. For 7 years, I jumped at every message, responded within seconds. Not today. When I walked into the office carrying a sleek portfolio instead of my usual overstuffed bag, I felt people noticing the difference. The red dress, the confidence in my walk. Something had shifted. Nathan was waiting by my desk, checking his watch. "There you are," he said, relief and irritation battling in his voice. "We need to go over the slides one more time. I've made some adjustments to your presentation." I set down my things calmly. "What adjustments?" He slid a USB drive across my desk. "Just a few tweaks to the messaging. And I've added Jason to the first 3 slides as project co-lead." Co-lead. For someone who'd attended exactly 2 meetings and contributed nothing. I picked up the drive and smiled. "I'll take a look." "Now please," he said, the friendly facade slipping. "We present in 2 hours." "I understand," I replied. "I just need to check something with Sarah in legal first. Contract language the client requested. I'll be right back." Before he could object, I walked away, the USB drive in my hand, but I didn't go to legal. Instead, I went to the small conference room I'd booked yesterday, locked the door, and plugged the drive into my laptop. As expected, Nathan had completely reworked my presentation. My name was minimized, Jason's was prominent, and the technical details, the ones that explained exactly how I'd saved the project, were simplified to the point of meaninglessness. I deleted the file, replaced it with my original presentation, and added 1 new slide at the end. Then I headed to the executive boardroom floor, arriving 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time. The catering staff was still setting up coffee and pastries. I helped them arrange things, making casual conversation, positioning myself as someone who belonged there. When the AV technician arrived to test the system, I introduced myself as the lead presenter and asked to check my slides. "Of course, Ms. Reeves. The system is ready whenever you are." I uploaded my presentation, confirmed everything worked properly, and then sat in a chair in the corner, reviewing my notes while executives and board members gradually filtered in. Nathan arrived 15 minutes before the start time, looking increasingly panicked when he couldn't find me. When he finally spotted me already in the boardroom, his eyes widened. "Allison, I've been looking everywhere for you. Did you review the updated slides?" I nodded, my face serene. "Everything's ready to go, Nathan. The presentation is loaded and tested." Relief washed over his face. "Perfect. The Westridge team just arrived. They're in the lobby." As he turned to leave, I added, "Oh, and Nathan? I kept your changes to a minimum. I think my original version conveys the technical achievement more accurately." He froze, then turned back slowly. "What does that mean? I need to see the slides now." "They're already loaded in the system," I said, gesturing to the AV setup. "No time to change them now. The board is arriving." The boardroom filled quickly. Richard, our CEO, made his entrance last, flanked by 2 Westridge Health Group executives. I recognized Dr. CEO, Eleanor Miller herself, the woman whose family name was on our contract, whose hospitals would be using our system. She wasn't just a client. She was the decision maker who controlled that $12.4 million. I straightened my spine, feeling the red fabric of my dress against my skin. For 7 years, I'd worn muted colors, played the part of the reliable background player. Today, I was choosing visibility. Nathan was sweating now, casting nervous glances between me and the presentation screen. Jason arrived, looking confused when he saw me already seated near the presenter's position. Richard began the introductions, his voice booming with practiced authority. "We're delighted to present the completed Miller project today," he said, gesturing broadly. "Our team, led by Nathan Cooper, has transformed the original concept into a state-of-the-art hospital management system that will revolutionize your operations." Not a single mention of my name, I wasn't surprised. "Nathan, why don't you take it from here?" Richard said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. Nathan stood, buttoning his jacket with slightly trembling fingers. "Thank you, Richard. We're extremely proud of what we've accomplished. I'd like to introduce Allison Reeves, who has assisted with the project implementation, and Jason Mercer, who has been instrumental in the technical architecture. Assisted, after 6 months of 18-hour days, after saving what 3 men had destroyed." I stood, smiled warmly, and moved to the presenter's position before either Nathan or Jason could reach it. "Thank you, Nathan. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to show you how we've not only salvaged but revolutionized the Miller project." I clicked to the first slide, my original slide, with my name clearly listed as project lead. Nathan's face tightened. But what could he do? Wrestle the clicker from my hand in front of the board and our most important client? For the next 20 minutes, I walked through every aspect of the project with confident precision. I explained how I'd identified the fundamental flaws in the original architecture, redesigned the workflow patterns, and created an intuitive interface that the hospital staff could learn in half the time originally estimated. The key innovation, I continued, clicking to slide 15, was recognizing that the previous approach violated 3 core principles of healthcare information systems. I outlined each one, watching Dr. Miller nod with increasing enthusiasm. Nathan tried to interject twice, but I smoothly acknowledged his points and continued, never surrendering control of the presentation. Jason, to his credit, looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly aware he was being positioned for work he hadn't done. "What about the security concerns our IT director raised last month?" Dr. Miller asked, her first direct question. Nathan started to answer, but I spoke first. "An excellent question. If you'll turn to page 17 in your packets." I paused as everyone shuffled through their materials to find the document I'd buried there. The one I knew Nathan and Richard hadn't read. "You'll see our comprehensive security protocol, which exceeds industry standards in 3 critical areas." I walked them through it, watching Dr. Miller's expression shift from skepticism to approval. By the time I clicked to the final slides, the energy in the room had transformed. The board members were leaning forward. The Westridge executives were exchanging impressed glances. "In conclusion," I said, "we've delivered a system that not only meets your original requirements, but enhances operational efficiency by an estimated 34% over your current processes." The implementation timeline on page 23 shows we're ready to begin rollout next week, with full deployment completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Applause broke out, actual applause, from the Westridge team. Richard was beaming now, dollar signs practically visible in his eyes. Nathan was attempting to look proud, while simultaneously looking like he might vomit. "Any questions?" I asked, standing tall in my red dress. Dr. Miller spoke up. "Just one. This is impressive work, Ms. Reeves. I'd like you to personally oversee the implementation at our flagship hospital." Before Richard or Nathan could respond, I smiled directly at her. "I'd be honored, Dr. Miller. However, there's something I should address first." I clicked to the final slide, the one I'd added last night, the one neither Nathan nor Richard had seen. On the screen appeared a simple statement: "Project continuity concerns." The room went silent. "What's this?" Richard asked, his smile faltering. "A critical consideration for the success of this project," I said calmly. "As the sole architect of the revised system, I've created detailed documentation for every component. However, there are nuances to the implementation that only I fully understand at this point. Nathan's face had gone from red to white. He knew what was coming. I recently learned, I continued, my voice steady despite my pounding heart, that Pinnacle planned to remove me from the project immediately after today's presentation. Before the actual implementation, before the training, before ensuring the system functions as promised. Richard stood abruptly. This is hardly the time or place. I disagree, I said, not raising my voice, but not backing down. This is exactly the time and place, because it directly impacts Westridge's $12.4 million investment. Dr. Miller's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you saying, Ms. Reeves? I turned to face her directly. I'm saying that 10 days ago, I overheard Nathan and Richard discussing plans to terminate my employment once I had saved your contract. Their exact words were, let her handle it, then fire her. The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Dr. Miller's expression hardened as she looked between Richard and Nathan. Is this true? She asked them. Nathan stepped forward. Allison is obviously misinterpreting something she thinks she heard. I have the recording, I said quietly, pulling my phone from my portfolio. Would you like me to play it? The blood drained from both men's faces. I hadn't been recording in the office that night. I'd been in the hallway, but they didn't know that. What they did know was that I'd been recording our recent conversations, and there was enough damning evidence there to make them uncertain. Dr. Miller turned to Richard. I find this disturbing, to say the least. We're entrusting our entire hospital network to this system. Continuity of expertise is non-negotiable. Richard tried to recover. Dr. Miller, I assure you, there's been a misunderstanding. Allison is a valued team member. We had been discussing restructuring, yes, but restructuring that coincidentally was scheduled for immediately after I delivered this project? I interjected. After working nights and weekends for 6 months to fix the mess your previous project managers created? Dr. Miller stood. I've heard enough. Mr. Harrington, our contract explicitly requires stable project leadership through implementation and the first year of operation. If Ms. Reeves created this system, then she needs to oversee its implementation. I let the moment hang there, watching Richard's mental calculations, the $12.4 million contract versus whatever he'd planned for me. Of course, he finally said, his businessman smile returning. Allison is essential to the project. There was never any intention of removing her. I turned back to the screen and clicked to a new slide I'd prepared, one showing the implementation schedule with my name clearly indicated as lead on every phase. Then you'll have no objection to formalizing my role in the updated contract, with guaranteed continuity for the full project lifecycle. It wasn't a question. Dr. Miller nodded approvingly. I insist on it, actually, and I'd like that addendum drafted today. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with handshakes and forced smiles. As the room emptied, Richard gripped my elbow, his fingers digging in just slightly too hard. My office. Now, he hissed. I smiled pleasantly. Of course. Right after I finish answering Dr. Miller's questions about the implementation timeline, I spent the next 20 minutes with the Westridge team, discussing details and building rapport. When I finally made my way to Richard's office, both he and Nathan were waiting, faces like thunderclouds. What the hell was that? Richard demanded the moment I closed the door. I remained standing. That was me ensuring project continuity for our most important client. You ambushed us in front of the board, Nathan said, voice shaking with anger. You had no right. I had every right, I countered, my voice level but firm. You were planning to fire me after I saved your contract, after I fixed the mess 3 men with corner offices created. I simply made sure our client understood what that would mean for their investment. Richard leaned forward, his expression calculating now. What do you want, Allison? A raise? A promotion? Name it. The question caught me off guard. I had expected rage, threats, maybe immediate termination despite the scene it would cause, not negotiation. For a moment, I considered what I did want. The director position I'd been angling for, a corner office with my name on the door. But standing there in my red dress, I suddenly realized those things belonged to the old Allison, the one who believed in the system, who thought loyalty would be rewarded with loyalty. I want 3 things, I said finally. First, The lead role on the Miller Project implementation, fully documented and contracted, with a completion bonus equal to 5% of the contract value. Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Second, I want a formal retraction of any termination plans, with Sarah from legal present as witness. Nathan started to protest, but Richard cut him off. Fine. Third, I continued, feeling a strange calm now. Once the Miller Project is successfully implemented and the first quarterly review completed, I want a clean departure from Pinnacle. A generous severance package, excellent references, and no non-compete restrictions. They both stared at me, confused. You want to leave? Nathan asked. After fighting to stay? I looked at him directly. I'm not fighting to stay. I'm fighting for the respect and recognition I've earned. There's a difference. Richard studied me with new eyes. You could have a future here, Allison. Today showed what you're capable of. Today showed what you're capable of too, I replied. And that's not something I can unknow. The aftermath was surprisingly quiet. Word spread through the office. Of course, whispers about how I'd outmaneuvered the executive team, secured my position on the biggest contract in company history, and somehow extracted concessions no one had seen Richard Harrington give before. Sarah from legal called me that afternoon. I just drafted the strangest contract addendum of my career, she said, sounding impressed. Congratulations, I think? Thank you, I said. For that, and for the casual information about termination protocols. She laughed softly. I might have noticed some concerning conversations. Professional women need to look out for each other. The next 6 months were intense but rewarding. I led the Miller Project implementation with complete authority. Nathan was mysteriously reassigned to another division. Richard treated me with a wary respect that never warmed into anything genuine, but I didn't need his approval anymore. The system rolled out smoothly across all 3 hospitals. Staff training went better than projected. Dr. Miller herself called me the most effective project manager she'd ever worked with during the final review meeting. When I submitted my resignation letter exactly 1 day after that review, Richard didn't seem surprised. He simply slid a folder across his desk with the severance terms we'd negotiated generous, as promised. You could have ruined us that day in the boardroom, he said as I reviewed the documents. Why didn't you? I looked up from the papers. Because this wasn't about ruining you. It was about valuing myself. My last day was quiet. I packed my few personal items, said goodbyes to the colleagues who'd become friends. As I walked to the elevator for the final time, Sarah from legal caught up with me. So where are you going next? She asked. I smiled. Dr. Miller offered me a position heading technology implementation across their entire hospital network. Double the salary, equity options, and a team I get to build myself. Sarah's eyes widened. You're going to work directly for the client? Can you do that? Check the revised contract language, I said, stepping into the elevator. No non-compete restrictions. I made sure of it. As the doors closed on Pinnacle Solutions for the last time, I felt neither triumph nor regret, just a quiet certainty that I would never again let anyone determine my worth but me. 2 months into my new role at Westridge Health Group, I received an email from Jason, my supposed co-lead from the Miller Project. The subject line read, "They're falling apart without you." Apparently, 3 more project managers had cycled through Pinnacle since my departure. The company had lost 2 major contracts. Richard was facing pressure from the board, and Nathan had been quietly let go. I closed the email without responding and turned my attention to my team brilliant people I'd hired because of their talent, not their connections or degrees. People I made sure knew they were valued every single day. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone else. Sometimes it's about refusing to let them destroy you and building something better from what they tried to take away. That day in the boardroom, standing in my red dress with the presentation clicker in my hand, I didn't just save my job, I found my power. And in the end, that was worth more than any corner office they could have offered me. So tell me, have you ever had to stand up for yourself when everyone expected you to stay quiet? Have you had to prove your worth to people who were ready to discard you? I read every comment, and your stories help me remember why sharing mine matters. If this resonated with you, Please subscribe to hear more truths that women like us rarely get to speak aloud. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about valuing themselves, share this video with them. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to be a victim of someone else's story.